let's bring, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start separating these things out into some different folders or some different files a little bit so we can get a idea on what this main thing is for. So for the sake of sanity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, let's see, can I create a folder in here? Well, let me do it there, but let me go into my home directory and I'm going to create a new folder in here. And we're going to call this CSC200 deathmatch or something like that. It's going to be our game. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create individual files for each of these things. So I'm going to put my class player in a file. So I'm going to do new file. I'm going to throw all my stuff from class player in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit save on this guy. And I'm going to save him inside of that folder just for an organization thing. So we're trying to give some rationale behind that name is main dealy. What do I call it? CS? Didn't I put it in my home directory? Oh, here it is. All right, and we're going to call this guy player.py. You didn't have to name it that, but I'm just going to name it that. All right, I'm going to delete a lot of these other things from here just to clean up my... All right, I'm going to do the same thing with my dice collection. So I'm going to create a new file. Paste that in there. Save the file. I'll save it in the deathmatch folder. And this is dice collection.py. I'll do the same thing for my class dice, which is not very big, but who cares? New file, paste that in there, save. And this is going to be dice.py. And then I'll do the same thing for fight. New file. All right, so the idea here is as your projects start getting bigger and bigger and bigger, where it stops making sense just to put everything inside of one big file, like you get this big monolithic monster thing. What we might want to do is we might want to break those things out into other classes, other files, so that our main class here looks a lot cleaner. In fact, actually what I'm going to do here, I'm going to leave this stuff in here, and I'm actually going to just copy my main, and we'll put this into a new file inside that same folder. And I'm going to call this guy driver. All right, and we definitely needed to have import. Actually, we don't need to have import random in here, but we are going to need to have import fight in here as well as import player. So I'm going to say import fight. Import player, and these guys needed to be inside of the same directory for this because those are two classes we are using in here, right? fight and player. So those guys live within the same folder as I'm currently operating in. So here's my deathmatch folder, and here's all these individual files that live inside of this folder. Okay? So right now I'm inside of driver. And the reason I name this thing driver is when you think about your computer and you get a new graphics card or something like that, and you install the driver for that graphics card, what you're doing is you're installing the piece of software that drives that piece of hardware, that makes it go. I've named my file here driver. I didn't have to call it that, but I chose to call it that because that's the file that's going to make my entire application here go. Because it's the file that has the main method inside of it. Okay? So the guy that has the main method inside of it, that's where programs begin and end. They begin and end with main. So I'm going to put that inside of driver. In fact, we see that it's pretty much all that's in driver. Driver looks very simple because now we spread all of our other stuff around into these other files. All right? So from driver's perspective, we need access to fight and player. From fight's perspective, we're going to need access to, he uses players, he uses a dice roller, or dice collection rather. So he's going to need access to import player. Actually, for right now, I'm going to leave these off so we see what happens. All right, so we'll just try to be obvious here with our driver that we need fight and player. In fact, even for right now, let's leave those off. Because Python 3 actually might auto-import, but let's see. All right, now I put this in a different directory than we historically have been putting stuff in. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do CSC200 deathmatch. All right, so now there's all my files. I'm going to run Python 3 driver.py. All right, so it's telling me player is not defined. It's never heard of that guy. So now if we go back in here, and I put those couple of things back in, so now this guy will know about fight and it'll know about player. I will see what the next error we get is. Line 6, it's saying it's not callable. Why is it not callable? That was surprising. No, it's right here. It's in the same file. Maybe because these guys have errors in them. Let's do Python 3 player.py. That guy's okay. Notice that nothing ran there. Python 3 dice collection py. Okay. Actually, why are they able to run? Oh, it's because nothing's actually getting called from them, so they're not actually okay. So a player is going to need a dice collection, so we need to import. And typically you would have written it this way to begin with, so we wouldn't have to go back and band-aid it up. And do we need to do anything else inside of player? That looks like that's all that guy needs. Then inside of dice collection, we are using a collection of dice objects, right? Yep, so we need dice. Okay, that looks like it's it for dice collection. Go ahead.
When we import, are we importing the name of the class or the name of the
file?
The name of the file, okay.
Because each of those files might have multiple classes in them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, so then from fight's perspective, we need players. We need dice collection. I think that's it. Dice didn't need anything special. Okay. All right, let's see how that guy cooks now. What? Object is not callable. That was unexpected. Let me try something here real quick. I'm just going to create two new little simple files in here. I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this guy test.py. I'm going to put that in my deathmatch guy here. All right, and then I'm going to create another file. Just call it 1. Also put it inside of deathmatch 1.py. All right, and so from within 1, I'm just going to write a little function that prints out hello world. So I'm going to do def print hello. I'm going to take in no parameters, and we're going to do print hello world. All right, that's all that 1 is going to do. Now in test.py, I want to import 1, and then we'll say if underscore underscore name is equal to underscore underscore main. Then we want to go ahead and we're going to call this other function called print hello, which actually was defined inside of another file. All right, so if we run 1, nothing happens because this guy just defines a function, doesn't do anything else. If we run test.py, this guy is going to call print hello, which it actually is getting from another file called 1. So now that we've simplified our issue, let's see if this is a weird Python 3 thing that I'm not familiar with. All right, so I want to run test. So Python 3 test.py. And hello is not defined. Yeah, same kind of deal. Let me check something here. I wonder if Python 3 requires us to put like a special thing at the top. Oh, we might need to do something like this. Yeah, so So the names of the, oh man, that is way worse in Python 3. Interesting. So this is saying from, I wonder, actually, I don't have a class to import from there. I just say import star. Because these would be our examples from before where we have function or we have classes in there. So we can import specific classes. Okay. I think that's the way it wants us to write it. Yeah, man, that is way worse. Well, there's a good rationale for it. The rationale is performance, since we already start off with this idea that Python is a lower performance language, right? When we just do like in this particular class here, if we just need access to this one function from there, rather than saying, give me everything that's inside of this other class, we can just bring in that one function and be more explicit so that what we're actually executing has less total code that it's working with. In fact, I want to just try something here. I'm going to try to change that to a star, which I think should mean from our file called 1.py, import everything. I think that's what that should mean. Let's see if it likes that syntax. Okay, it does. All right. So that's me purposely being lazy, right? I'm saying, look, I have a whole bunch of functions in there that I want to have access to. So just give me all of them, even if I only use one or two of them. All right. And we actually see this, an example of something like this in languages like Java. When we go to, if you were writing Java yourself, historically, and let's see, do I have, I know this is huge right now, but we were testing something the other day. So here's a bunch of imports up here. So this is Java stuff. This IDE imported stuff for us. So it's specifically, so notice I have two different things, both from the same, let's call it file called widget. So rather than saying import android.widget.star, which would bring in everything that's inside of here, it's just brought in edit text, because I used that, and it's brought in toast, since I used that. Toast is how you like put something on a screen. Okay. You know, like toast. So it's like we're doing a very toast-related thing. So in any case, because we used the IDE to do this for us, it did those imports, and it was very explicit about exactly what we needed. Whereas if we were writing this by hand, a lazy programmer maybe would have said android.widget.star. Just give me everything from that library. I might only use one little piece, but just give me everything because I don't want to have to spell it or something like that. Does that make sense? So now, what's kind of inconvenient here, since we're not using an IDE that does auto imports, that this is a little bit, so we can choose to be lazy if we want to. Or we can, I guess, or we can choose to be explicit. So what I can do now in my other ones, so here's driver. So what you would say here is you could say from fight import that, from player import that. Let me just get rid of test PY and one. From fight, we would say from player, import player. Oh, it's lowercase, sorry. From dice collection, import dice collection. And then I'll show you maybe a little bit better way of doing this, since we've split this stuff into a whole bunch of files. We didn't have to do anything there. Dice collection, we have to say from dice, import dice. For player, we have to say from dice collection, import dice collection. All right, and I think that should do it. I would say Python 3. Oh, here, dice collection. We got farther along this time. Dice collection use dice. Player use dice collection. Oh, interesting. Okay. So actually, because all those things get brought into here, it wants us to import them in here.
Oh, really? Okay.
So from dice, import dice. From dice collection, import dice collection. So that's fight, dice, dice collection player. Okay, I think that's all of it. Import fight. Do we need to say import all here? Not just the name of the class? It didn't make a difference. I assume it's okay with us having our file names in caps. We could try to change these to lowercase. Can't imagine that would be the difference. Yeah, so it doesn't know about those file names. Definitely want something like that. We did name our classes the same, right?
Oh, hey.
Class is fight. Dice is dice. Class is dice collection. I'm going to remove my imports from these individual files. Just bring them in that top level file. You got something that worked?
Yeah.
And then you don't know why?
I thought I did what you did, except I wasn't watching it closely, so.
All right, so now all my imports are just in that main file. Not import name. Dice. So it wants those things in those other files.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you have in your driver?
So in
Wait, you
driver.
have from dice collection import dice.
Oh. Thank you.
Let's see if I can get these two.
Now I don't know.
All right, yeah. Now we're back to we just need to put the things back in our other ones.
Okay. So I had everything in driver, but I just commented out dice and dice collection, and it still works fine.
Whoop,
So that's not the issue.
what did I do?
So in dice, I have random imported.
Oh, we do need to have random imported in here.
That might be all it is.
That was in our original, but when we moved it, we took that out.
And then
This guy we need to have
just the dice one.
dice. This guy we need to have
Dice. It doesn't need random, does it?
no, because he uses
I don't know. I have that in there. And then the last one I have.
so fight player and dice collection.
Yes.
Dice is not defined from dice collection. From dice, import dice. I'm actually going to delete these 2 lines right now. So I don't think you need those.
Yeah, you don't need those.
Player uses dice collection. Dice collection uses dice. So player uses dice collection. Did I spell it right? Dice collection. Dice collection uses dice. Dice doesn't use anything else other than random. It has a class in it called dice. And yours looks the same way? Or
I
it
think
must look better.
Does it need to have the dot in front of the from dot?
You don't have these dots, do you?
No, I don't have any dots in there.
Yeah, that was that one syntax we saw in there. This is just the file name.
And you have the 2 for fight, right? Yeah.
Player, dice collection, dice collection.
Okay. Maybe it's something else.
From dice, import dice. It's the downside of always going back and doing surgery later on. If you had just written it in an organized way to begin with.
Is the original file fine? That we didn't splice up completely?
No, I think this is it. I mean, I'm not even using this one anymore.
Yeah, I mean, does that one work fine though? Or is there
Oh, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, will our original still work?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that guy doesn't live there, so he lives on what, desktop?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, it's yep, he still works. Let's make sure all of our files are in here. We have dice collection, driver, fight player. Let's get rid of the 1 and the test. Let me also get rid of this pi cache thing just in case this is.
What is my cache?
It's something that was generated for us.
Okay.
Here, we can move into that. Yeah, because I wonder if since we had like old versions of this, if that's like still broken. So let me just do a remove. So we won't have that guy anymore. Now if I try to run it, I think that'll get recreated. So maybe it was had old stuff in it.
Nope.
All right, so this is in dice collection. So we follow the path. In driver, we have Blaine is equal to player Blaine. So then in player, on line 6, we have HP roller is equal to dice collection of this. So let's make sure in a player, we have access to a dice collection, because it's complaining about right here. And we do still have a dice collection that just takes in a string, correct? Yep. So that's what it was complaining about. And then from within dice collection on line 27, it's complaining about this dice with number of sides. So that's on line 27 of our dice collection. And it's complaining about add dice. Right here. It's on 29 because it's inside of this guy, so it's off 2. Self add dice. Here's our dice. Number of sides. From dice, import dice. Oh, hold on. Was that file not saved? Ha!
There's a bird short for you.
There.
Bird short.
Yeah, we didn't save our file.
Doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Because remember, we pasted all this stuff in there, and then we went back later, and after I pasted all the stuff, I saved. But then I went back later and added this, and then I get this little blue dot up there. See the little blue dot? That guy? I mean, he's not saved. Yeah, whatever. So, now that we've done that, that train wreck, let me show you another way we could have done it that maybe be a little bit more compact. So you might say, okay, well, it's kind of nice having driver sit here on its own. Because I've kind of mentioned that all programs begin and end with main. So it's kind of nice to be able to just open up your logic here and say, I'm just kind of playing with toys, right? I have all these objects that are floating around, and I just have access to them, and here I'm using those guys, completely forgetting about the details of these guys that are being abstracted and encapsulated inside these other files. Make sense? But now we might go and look at our organization here and say, you know what? Dice is pretty small. And dice and dice collection really work together. So couldn't we have put those guys inside the same class? Probably. Similarly, fight. Fight's not that big, but maybe we want fight to live on its own, but fight uses dice collections, it uses these other things. Could we have made an argument to have all of our classes inside of just one big scary file and then have driver bring in that file, the stuff from that file, and then look nice and clean like this so we didn't have we didn't have to minimize all the stuff up top to hide? Wouldn't that maybe be like a reasonable hybrid? As our project gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, maybe it makes sense to split it out into a whole bunch of individual files like this. But if I go that route, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new file. And we're going to call this guy, let's call it deathmatch classes.py. All right. And what this guy's going to do is he's going to hold all of the classes other than, well, he's going to hold everything that's not in driver. So I'll go ahead and I'll grab fight. I don't need to do any of the imports because the imports are what linked those files together before. I'll grab dice. I'll grab dice collection. Now we will need to bring import in here for dice. There's my dice collection. Bring player. All right, then up top here, I'm going to import random because dice needed that. And I'll go ahead and minimize everything just so it looks nice and clean in here. All right, so I saved it. So our deathmatch classes contains all of the classes that we're using as part of our deathmatch. But then inside of driver, we just need to import death match classes all. So we'll kind of keep our library in that other file, then keep this guy here. Let me run this real quick, make sure I didn't break anything. No module named death class. Death match. Why no module? That's how I spelled it, right? Death match classes.
That one's saved on your desktop.
Oh, death match classes is or driver? Are you sure? Yep. So I'll move that. There we go. Oh. All right. Now it's in my same folder as the rest of them. Now he's happy. So put them all in the same folder. Because when we go in here and we say from deathmatch classes, it is looking at this in the same folder as we're in with our driver. So it found this file. I said, give me everything from that file. And everything from that file gives me access to all of these individual classes. And dice required random. That's why I imported random here. So now I have access to all of that stuff inside of here, so now I can just start working with those objects. That makes sense? Now, we could make the argument that using a tool like Atom, we could have kept all this inside of one class like we originally had it, right? Because we can do this minimize thing here to kind of hide the details. That makes it so that we don't need to play this game of using multiple files. Maybe it has a little bit smaller footprint. That's okay. Under what circumstance would we definitely want to separate these into different files as opposed to keep them inside of one file here? This is more of an object-oriented concept question. Can you give me a scenario when we would definitely want to, for instance, have dice in its own file? Yeah.
Because you want to use a dice roller in a different game entirely?
Yeah. So right now we're completely self-contained, right? We're making our deathmatch game, whatever, and we're pretending like all these classes only belong to us for this one game. But if you have, a collection of dice at home, you might use that for a whole bunch of different board games, right? You might play Dungeons and Dragons. You might play, Monopoly uses dice, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, dice for a whole bunch of different games because that tool is applicable to different things. That makes sense? So in that case, you might want to have that tool separate from the tools that are specific to this game so that you can now import that same tool into other applications that you write without having to go in and copying stuff out of this file into some other file. Does that make some sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now there isn't really a wrong way of doing it, but you would certainly say that if you're at home and you need some dice and you have some inside of the Monopoly box, you wouldn't just go to the store and buy new dice. You would probably grab them out of the Monopoly box because you needed dice, right? Well, if we have it all inside of this file here, we would have to go into the Monopoly box to get our dice. And maybe in our house, we just decide that's where we keep the dice, is in the Monopoly box or something like that. That's okay. You can make that decision. But realistically, you might say, well, I have a place for dice in the house. And whenever we play a game that requires dice, we go and get the dice. That might be a more organized way of doing it. All right, so questions about that stuff. And notice that we only had main inside of the one file we meant to run. If I try to run any of these other files, well, if I try to run deathmatchclasses.py, nothing happens because I don't have any executable code in there. Now, let's go ahead and put something in there, though. We'll do print. I'll say deathmatchclasses.py here. Just print it in there. So now if I run this guy, we get our deathmatchclasses.py. If I run this guy,
Long one.
What a battle.
Do they want to run the
Score.
okay, notice that showed up as part of the import from when I imported it, but our program began running with main. So you put main in the file that you intend to run. It is more strictly enforced in other languages. So, for instance, we wouldn't have the ability in Java to do this. We couldn't just throw a print statement in the middle of a class like that. We would have to have housed that inside of a function or inside of main. So in Java, we couldn't come up with this identical example. We could come up with that example where we don't do any logic in here. Well, we don't do any runnable logic in here. Instead, this guy's meant completely to be a tool used in other classes. The same thing's true in C#. Same thing's true in all strongly typed languages. Loosely typed languages, because of their nature, treat each file kind of separately instead of bringing it into an executable thing, because they are interpreted at runtime as opposed to compiled prior to runtime. And because of that, every line that's in each of those files gets touched. Does that make sense? So this is more of a convention that will serve you well when you go to strongly typed languages that strictly enforce this type of thing. Okay, so right now, when we have a fight, we tell that fight to run. That is inside of our deathmatches.class. Here's our fight. Here's what we say to fight. So this guy goes back and forth between our two guys. What might be the next thing we'd want to do inside of our game? So right now they're just kind of fighting each other, and eventually somebody dies, right? But when we go and look at the logic that's flying by, we can look at how hard somebody was hit. So that's where Blaine dies. Let's go up near the top. So Blaine had 27 hit points. Then he went down to 20. So he lost 7 hit points there. So that was a pretty hard blow, right? So we might want to give some color commentary, so to speak, as to how hard somebody was hit. So if somebody gets hit for maybe 1 or 2, they could say something like, Mike lightly grazes Blaine or something like that. Okay, as opposed to if you get hit for like the maximum amount, let's say 7 was the max. I don't know what his modifier was, but if you get hit for the maximum amount, then maybe we say that Mike's swing. I don't know. Eviscerates Blaine or something like that. So maybe add like 2 or 3 different levels of damage. All right. So we want to go in. So get your code into an organization either with all the files like this, or have driver in one and then all your classes in another. And then we want to go through inside of fight. I'll put a little comment here before this guy. Add commentary following each attack that gives an idea. Needle haystack, that gives of how damaging the attack was. So for example, if an attack hits for 1, you might say the attack lightly grazes the opponent. Something like that. So for the assignment, create at least 3 different categories of damage. This is going to be done just with some if statements. If the damage was 1 to 2, print out this. If the damage was 3 to 4, print out this. If the damage was 4 or more, or 5 or more, print out this if you only want to stick to 3. So most of this assignment is organizing your stuff into separate files, and then the second part is just adding some if statements into strategic places. Make sense? All right, so I'll give you this as a starting point, and I will see everybody on Wednesday.